So now we're going to get into some of the image editing tools that we have at our disposal. So in any point cloud data set, as long as you have images captured at the time of scanning and you import those, you can then go in and edit the images, the standard JPEG, the HDR. You can do some image blurring, or if you wanted, you can go and export out the JPEGs, edit them in a third-party software like Lightroom or Photoshop, and then re-import them with the changes. And the JPEG image is going to be the one that controls the coloring of the point cloud. So if I were just to go into a single setup here, right, the default view is going to be your JPEG. From there, we can switch to the HDR, get a little different view. Sometimes you want to turn your point cloud off with the HDR, because the points do look different, simply put because they are colorized off of the JPEG image. So you got these two image options, and with that we're going to kind of show some of the tools you have. So right now I'm just in the one setup, so if I wanted I could just right click on this one and then I can go edit HDR image. So now it's going to load just this single image, but you can also, after you go through your edits, you can also toggle on this apply to project, in which case all of the changes, all of the adjustments that you've made will go and simply put apply to the project as a whole. So this image editor that's built in will edit both the HDR and the JPEG. So because of that, especially with the HDR, it can be a little bit slow. So we'll just maximize the screen for now. So it just kind of loads a low resolution version of the image so you can get the point across of what kind of color changes you're doing. So I believe the default's going to be this Reinhard tab, but if you switch through them, you can see kind of some of the starting points that you get with the coloring. Some are better, some are worse. Not sure the full situations and uses for each of them, but you have a couple options. But I believe the Reinhard to me kind of is the best starting point. So with that, you got a few options kind of in this right drop down: intensity, light adapt, color adapt, gamma, saturation, and brightness. So kind of play with the sliders. It's not the most extensive image editor, but in a pinch it can kind of bump the saturation, make it look a little nicer, a little more presentable. So from there, just kind of going through each of them, kind of play with the toggles, see how it changes. Right, the light, the color, some of those are like shadows and lights, and kind of how it adjusts the colors and the image look. Not much there. Gamma. Looks like it's just kind of the highlights and the whites of the image. Saturation. Right, all the way to the right. Max it out. Looks pretty good. Brightness. Play with it, whatever you're happy with. And once you hit OK, so in this case I just have the one image selected, so that's all I'm going to apply. But at this point I could apply it to the project, and all those changes I made would go through to the 6 images. But you also have the pick gray, so I believe you want to set the white balance. I believe you can pick a gray, and that's kind of how it will set the white balance of the image as a whole. But from there we'll just hit OK. So now you'll kind of see the progress bar as it's going. One image, not so bad, but once again, when you get into the really large data sets and you want to do it all in-house to register 360, it can add up with time. So just be careful or cognizant if you are in a time crunch, it may not be the best option. So with the next one, we'll get into some of the image blur and then how to export images to edit in third party and then re-import. So bring it back shortly. All right, so this first image that we edited is now done. So kind of go to the standard JPEG. So this is what it looks like. Now we got the full resolution image back in. If you switch to a different, you can see slight changes in the image, nothing too crazy, but it does look a little bit nicer, a little bit better. Just kind of look for this area. So now we're going to get into image blur. So the difference with image blurring and doing kind of the general color changes is image blur is purely by a setup basis. So editing images, from there we'll just simply select a single setup. We'll go into edit image blur, and now it'll load the same image. I'll go and expand this out. This can't full size this window unfortunately, but once you're in it, from there you can zoom in, left click, and you can pan around. You can get to whatever view you need. So you'll notice at the bottom you got reset, auto blur, and view. So auto blur will go through and it'll automatically try and blur out people's faces and then license plates. I think there's one other one that something with the software can recognize, but that's what auto blur does. But if you're in like a TSA airport environment, or you're in like a government federal job, you got whiteboards or boards or posters of information that's confidential, A lot of that's going to be manually done, but it's pretty simple to do. So once you go in, you load the image. At this point, we'll go and hit view. And so now you'll notice you got that kind of blue little circle. So you can scroll in and out to increase the size, decrease the size. And at that point, once you're in this view button, it's going to kind of keep this image locked. So just know you kind of have to get your image to where you want it first of all, then you go into view, and then you can come in here and start to blur. So at which point, to start blurring, you have to both left click and right click at the same time, and then you can drag this blur circle around wherever and it'll start to blur it out. So in my case, I'll just do some of these floor drains and kind of show you what it looks like. So both left click and right click are enabled. So now I can start to go through and I can start to blur out everything that I need. So change the size, come back, fill it in. So that's how you can start to look around and start to blur out some parts of the images, and once you're happy, you can hit save. In my case, I'm not going to, I'm just going to hit reset, but that is kind of the basics of how to come in and blur images if you're in scenarios where that needs to be done. So we'll hit cancel though, and then kind of the last thing to go and look at is going to be exporting images for editing and re-importing from a third-party software. So at this point, more often than not, I will select all my setups, or I can just right-click on my bundle and go export panoramic images. You have as JPEG, as the EXR, or you can do both. The EXR is the HDR image file format. Very few applications that I'm aware of can even edit them. I think Photoshop is one, but in which case the file sizes are very large, they're difficult to edit. It's not recommended. I would just always just do a JPEG image, because once again, that's what controls the coloring of the point cloud, and for the most part, that's all I export with my LGSs in the data sets, is just the JPEG images. So we'll go export as JPEG. So now you can go in, save them wherever. I've got a specific folder that I save everything in for raw unedited files, so I'll just select folder. So now it's going to go through and start to export out each of the individual images. And once they're done, at that point you can edit them in whatever software you want, so I won't go through that. But once I do edit them, I'll bring it back and then we'll go import them and show you what that looks like. So just about done. It's a fairly quick process to export. I think it's around, ballpark guess, like 8 to 10 seconds a setup to export if you do the full 5K images, at least with my computer. So it'll give you that those are all exported, so now you're ready to go and start editing them. So I'll bring them back in a second. So I just wanted to show kind of what it looks like from a Lightroom perspective. Not a full tutorial in the slightest sense of Lightroom, but with editing the full 5K 360 dome images out of register, just be aware that these files and these images are very, very large. So they're typically around 30 megabytes from kind of a raw JPEG standpoint once you export them, and they're basically 210 megapixels for the size of the image. So just know that if you are going to edit these, you're going to want a computer that's got as much horsepower as available. It'll just make life as easy and as fast as possible through this editing process. But in my case, I'll just kind of show you along what it looks like, how I work through it. In this case, I just do very minimal edits, nothing too crazy. I'll go through and edit them. So now, got some images, they're all edited, looking pretty good. Once again, very basic, nothing too crazy, just kind of make the colors pop, a little more texture, a little more clarity, nothing crazy. So at this point, ready to export. So now I'll just simply go export, and the key to exporting, you have to make sure that the file name stays the same, because when you re-import from whatever folder location, it's going to use the same file name as the same setup to go and match the two and then realign them. So just know whenever you export, those file names need to stay the exact same. So now we'll go and export. Just make sure you keep your quality, whatever software you're using, keep it as maxed out as possible. And then from there, I'll go to kind of my standard location. So go and export these out, and once they're done, I'll show you how to import. So now that those images are exported, before they were like 25 to 30 megabytes kind of in the raw state. Now they are around 50, a little over 50. Typically I'll kind of see 60 to 70 megabytes if I'm doing lots of edits, lots of changes, but that's kind of what it does for a file size increase. At this point, just want to show this as well through our project storage. So this is our current project. So we're at just a hair over 5 gigs as a whole for this project. So granted, these images aren't very many, but even importing the increased file size of the images still doesn't affect the project size very much. So at this point though, just going to go and right click on my bundle. I'm going to go re-import panoramic images, and at this point it's just simply finding that file location that you got edited. So this is where I keep my edited photos, and once again the file name is left exactly as is, so the software recognizes which files or which images go to which setup. So at this point you're just ready to hit select folder, and now it's going to search that folder, it's going to find those images, and then it's going to re-import those images and then recolorize the point cloud based off the new JPEG images. So let this chug along for a few minutes, and this is probably like 3 or 4 times longer in terms of the export. So once again, keep that in mind if you're in a time critical processing or data set workflow. This may be an option that you skip, but if it's not, in my case, from my final as-builds, all of my in-wall scans, close-in stuff, I'll always go through and edit the images just to make the images pop, look a little nicer, and then that way when we're turning everything over to the owner, to property, or whoever, that it just looks as best as possible. So you do also have the option, if you were to say edit these images in Photoshop or some software where you can go and apply HP logos or basically overlay new images on top of this 360 image. You can totally do that, and it'll totally recolorize the point cloud to match whatever that image is. So in my case, there's a few data sets we shared with architects and engineers kind of as an example, and we put HP logos kind of all over the data set, on the concrete floors, core walls, I mean, you name it. That HP logo showed up in every one of those setups, every one of the point clouds, and you could see HP logo kind of integrated into the data set's point cloud. So just a cool little feature to keep in mind if that situation ever comes up, or you ever kind of need a watermark or stamp your data set just to make sure you can always know that it was ours. It's an option you have. So but once this is done, we'll bring it back and kind of show you the differences and take a look at the file size, see if it very much changed with the increased image file sizes. Alright, so it's finished importing, and the point cloud might look a little bit different. Once again, we didn't make too many drastic changes to the images, so it should look similar. But now, when we go into any of our setups, and we go and look at our JPEG image, it should have all of those edits that we made and adjusted. Just another kind of reminder, when you first go into a setup, sometimes Register won't load the full resolution of the image, so you can either switch to the HDR and then go back, and then it seems to kind of snap out of it and reload the full image resolution. So, but at this point though, basically a point cloud has been recolorized to the updated JPEG images, and you are ready to export or move on to kind of the next phase of your workflow. So that's kind of the start to finish from editing images inside Register 360, doing some of the blur function, and then lastly kind of exporting them out, third-party editing software, and then re-importing those images for your data set. So we'll see you in the next training.